Welcome everybody to episode 49 of Drum Education Live. And today we have Mr. Stu Roberts here.
Hey, hello.
Woo! So thank you for coming and for your time. And I know you because you taught me for a little bit at ACM.
Yes.
And that was pretty cool. I always remember your playing was just so smooth and your attitude so positive and warm. And I guess I want to know a bit more about where it started for you. How old were you when you started playing, and who were your influences?
Um, well, so I was around about 10, and I was at school, and there was some. I would love to know what type of drums they were, but there was some drums in the corner. I think it was only like a hi-hat and a snare drum and maybe a bass drum. And I was just really drawn to it, And then one day the teacher said, "Oh, does anybody want to have a go?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll have a go." And I got up there, and all I could do was play the hi hat, so like basic rock rhythm, but just the hi hat. So no kick and snare, just like on the hi hat, and then she was like, "Okay, good. Well, the next thing we're going to do in the music classes, we're going to enter a competition where you have to write a song which is like an anti-graffiti song." So me and my 10-year-old best mate at the time, Graham, came up with this thing where he was going to rap, and I was I was going to play the hi hat because that's all I could do. And that was really how it started, And I almost knew straight away, like, this is it. This is what I'm going to do, because I was a relatively badly behaved kid in school, And then all of a sudden, I had this thing where I was like, okay, that's it. This is me. This is what I want to do, and I was just very drawn to it very quickly. And then, so from there, my mum played guitar in church a lot, and there was quite a lot of music going on. But actually, my sister is a very talented musician, and I was younger than her. So my sister was involved playing sort of saxophone and clarinet, those kind of things. And I was kind of like the one who didn't actually play any musical instruments, but I was around a lot of kind of amateur sort of church music and stuff. There was loads of things happening, and in amongst that there was a drummer who I thought was amazing, just a young guy called Tom, but he was a couple of years older than me, and I really sort of looked up to that. And his brother played bass, and like that was really cool to be around that. And then also within that same sort of circle of people, there was a drummer called Robbie Tyrrell, who was a sort of retired London West End drummer, who, because I grew up in Scotland in a little town called Kelso, which is in the borders, sort of, you would think there wouldn't be much music going on there, but I was really fortunate that there was music happening, and there were opportunities to play. I mean, this is going back 30 years, but anyway, so Robbie was there, and so he played with Lulu, and he played on the sort of West End production of Cats, and he was just a working musician. But to see somebody like that play at first hand was really amazing. And I used to come along to this this sort of kind of choir that my mum would play guitar in. Robbie was on drums, and sometimes Tom would play drums, and every now and again I'd be allowed to play some drums. But really, I couldn't. I was, looking back, probably could hardly play. But just sitting so close to guys who could play and just being around it was really inspiring. So that kind of sowed the seeds, and then eventually I got a set of drums, which was like a Tama Swing Star kit from the 70s, I think it was, in blue, with sort of one crash cymbal, a Max crash cymbal, and yeah, I just absolutely loved it. And I didn't really have any clue what to do whatsoever, but I was like stealing my mum's records. You know, my mum had a load of old vinyls that were just stuck in the cupboard, but it was like the Beatles and some Motown stuff. So I would put those on and set the drums up next to it and try and play along. And it's probably nowhere near it at all, but I was just kind of soaking up the vibe of the music and making a sound to go with it, you know. And I suppose gradually what happens is, as your ears become better, it becomes more than just hearing a sound, and you start to hear some details and be able to pick out some bits. And you know, my parents were very kind, and they started getting me some drum lessons, and then I, you know, just that whole sort of fascination with drums developed, and I became completely obsessed. I was like, I was like the kid that would go into Murray Seaton's drum shop in Edinburgh, which was kind of the main drum shop near where I live. I would ask for drum things by catalog number, you know, because I would like sit there at night memorizing catalog numbers of like drum hardware, stuff like that, because I was so obsessed. I mean, it sounds so ridiculous now, but I was that into it that I was a kid that was there with, you know, Rhythm magazine and the torch under the pillow. You know,
Oh, I love it.
yeah, totally looking at all those pictures and just marveling at all these amazing drum kits and all that stuff. And I could literally regurgitate the magazine from cover to cover. You know, I was like, and you know, if anybody would talk to me, pretty much within 10 seconds, I'd swung this whole conversation round to something drum related, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was me in the early days, you know, and then I was very lucky. I had a good Perry drum teacher in school, a guy called Dr. Ken Mailer, who was like a retired military musician, and he was absolutely incredible, but he was totally brutal as well.
Well, he's
So
from the military.
yeah, like he was just so brutal. Like I used to play in the sort of percussion section of the regional orchestra, and he used to stand there with a stopwatch and timer, setting the gear up and breaking it down and that sort of thing. And I remember we did one concert somewhere, and I was like, I was always quite an anxious kid as well. I was always like really wanted to play well and all the rest of it. And I remember going, you know, oh, was it okay? And he was like, well, you're wearing the wrong socks. You know, from the back of the hall, all he could see was like these tartan socks that I was wearing or whatever. They should have been black socks. So he was amazing because, you know, he was really on the side of the students. And at the same time, you know, he'd been there and done it as a proper pro musician outside of the army and within the army thing. So he had that sort of military discipline and a huge awareness of what was going on. So he was just hugely influential at the time, and he was like I was like that kid who would always be going up and going like, well, do you think I've got what it takes to do this, you know, I really want to do this, you know. And he was always like, you know what, you can do it, you just need to stick at it and, you know, focus on the right things. And so I'm really lucky that I had those people. And another person to mention is just a local drummer to near where I grew up called Douglas Scott. And Douglas was also hugely influential because, first of all, he was one of the first teachers that I had that would correct me over and over again. You know, sometimes like when you're teaching kids, it's quite, I think for some teachers, they can get drawn into allowing the kid, letting stuff go. You know, maybe some of the minor detail isn't quite right, but they let it go to keep the kid's motivation up and to kind of go, right, well, you know, the main points of the thing are there. But Douglas was wonderful because he was always like, no, that bit, that bit, that bit. And quite often I'd be like, oh, I've got no idea what he's asking me to do. And I just sit there playing the same thing again and again and again in exactly the same way. But he was brilliant because he exposed me to people that I think Dr. Mailer wouldn't have exposed me to, just because he was from a much different era. So Dr. Mailer was all about like Buddy Rich, Gene Krupa, Dave Tuff, the sort of big band type players, and then some of the sort of 70s and early 80s session players like, you know, Steve Gadd, that sort of thing. But he was very much sort of reading the charts and also being able to play tuned, also being able to play timps, whereas Douglas was much younger. He was probably only in his like mid-20s when he was teaching me, but he had a black Yamaha 9000 in his living room, and he was like, I made you a tape. It's Dennis Chambers. Go and listen to this. This is Dave Weckl. Go and listen to this. This is Vinny. Go and listen to this. And to be honest, I had no idea what was going on in that music, really. But I was just hearing the sound and being around somebody who was passionate about that sort of side of things, which was incredible. So Douglas isn't, you know, I've been trying to get in touch with him, actually, to drop him a message to say thank you, because I've you know, I haven't got his number or whatever, and he's not really on the internet because he's not a working drummer. He's an architect or an architect's drawer, I think. But he just had this passion for music, and he was probably the only guy in my area who had those skills. And thank goodness, you know, I found him, and my mum was kind enough to drive me up to see him after school, and you know, that was a really amazing time. You know,
How old were you then?
so I'd be like maybe 12, 13, 14, 15, that kind of age. So I was having lessons with Douglas and also having lessons with Ken Mailer at school. So he was the Perry teacher. And at the high school that I went to, we had like wind band and, you know, sort of pop band. And you know, there was like amateur dramatic musicals going on. So I had amazing opportunities, really, that don't seem to be there for younger players now, for sure. But I was able to go and play for these theatre productions, and I've got to be honest, you know, I really struggled with the reading thing. I wasn't a natural reader at all, but what I could do was I listened to the music and I sort of played something that fitted, and gradually my reading got better and my ears got better, and it all came together. But in those early days, I was playing for these shows, but I honestly didn't really have much of an idea about what was going on. So, like, I couldn't actually really read the parts, you know. But I just kind of play the right sort of thing and the right sort of vibe, you know, and probably didn't get away with it half as much as I thought, you know. You know, I just there was part of me that would just really panic. Like I remember I went to, so there were a couple of summers as I was getting a bit older. There was a organisation in Scotland, which I don't know if it is still running, but it was called National Youth Orchestra of Scotland. So you would do like a week's residential, a couple of days residential, and then you'd all perform a concert at the end for parents. And the standard was pretty high. And I remember sitting there playing snare drum, going, I can't read any of this, you know, just playing away. And the conductor just going, okay, stop everybody. Okay, drums, just from bar whatever it was, you know, just play that again. No, that's not quite right. They're trying to get no, that's not quite right either. Tell you what, why don't you have a look at that in the interval? You know, I'm like, oh no. And then another time I remember being at this in the school band, and I was playing the bass drum. I mean, it can't have been difficult. It was probably only minims or quarter notes, but basically I kept going when the band stopped. And I remember, like, just I had this was like my whiplash moment, where basically the conductor was like, okay, everybody stop, right, bass drum on your own from bar whatever. And I couldn't read it. I didn't know what was going on. I was just stood there sort of quivering inside, just hoping the moment would end. And then what made it worse was Ken Mailer was there, and he just started shouting at me in front of everybody, like, what's wrong with you, boy? You know, he's like, what's wrong with you? You know, And inside, I was just inside, and I'm just like,
God.
just like dying, just like, please make this end. I'm never gonna play the drums again. This is awful. And
I'm just
so
laughing at like your biggest trauma.
yeah, I mean, there's been plenty of others, but
Oh my God, that's
but
I would have like cried and
oh yeah, I
you
was
know.
crying on the inside, and I'm sure, yeah, I just but so there was there was all that good, positive, healthy stuff going on. Yeah, yeah. But it was it was an amazing upbringing, and and I just knew from the beginning that drums was what I was going to do.
Now let me tap.
That's really tickled me. That sorry, it's just like what a nightmare, but it's amazing. Like, oh my God.
But I want to tap into that a little bit further, because nowadays we live in an era where young people don't get frustrated. If anything goes wrong, they stop immediately. And I think
Yeah.
that is a great moment where you let's say you got rock bottom. So how did you at that young age bounce back? How did you bounce back?
I don't think it was ever. I don't think there was at that point. There was never a question of stopping. It was just like, okay, this is a bit of a wake up that I can't keep doing this, and I need to figure out why it is that I can't do it. So basically I sat down. So the summer holidays came, and I sat down with do you know the sort of purple Buddy Rich book, the Buddy Rich Rudiments,
rudiments,
Henry
yeah.
Adler book. Yeah. So anyway, I sat down with that and just basically really tried to understand it, and I just sat there writing in all the counting in, and then there was just like a moment where I was just like, oh, that's what it is. I can do it, and then from that point onwards, it got better, the reading side of thing. And what I realized was I needed to look at it in terms of shape and contour of the notes, rather than, and I actually needed to engage my brain rather than just panic the moment the thing was put on the stand, which I think, to be honest, that's what I've been doing. It just like, as soon as the music would go on the page, I'd read the title and my brain would just go, and it's no wonder you can't do something if the rest of your brain is just panicking, So that was it really. And I've always had reasonable ears, or a reasonable understanding of what the drums should be doing. So from that point onwards, even though I didn't automatically become a good reader, I could kind of fill in the gap, between what I could understand on the chart and what the music required. And thankfully we play an instrument where a certain amount of interpretation is allowed. And then over another one to share with you is on this the National Youth Jazz Orchestra of Scotland sort of summer school. I'd be like maybe 15 at this point, and there were some phenomenal drummers that were also there. There's a drummer called Andrew Bain, who now teaches, I think, at the Birmingham Conservatoire, and he's been out in the States. He's a phenomenal jazz drummer, and probably the best drummer, or certainly one of the best drummers that Scotland has ever produced. There's a guy called Alan Koska. If you're not familiar with him, do check him out. But basically, there was the three of us there, and I remember we would take turns in the big band, and my turn came, and this chart was put up, and it was loads of like sort of dotted 16th rhythms. And I just looked at that and panicked. I can remember to this day, just basically just panicking. And then all I could see, it was like my eyes zoned in on the stylistic sort of guidance that was on the left, which just said halftime funk shuffle. So as soon as the conductor counted off the band, I was there playing the funk shuffle, which was the Purdy shuffle, which Douglas had introduced me to. and thankfully, that's all the tune needed. And I remember the conductor stopping the band and going, "Drums, that's great. It sounds really good." And I was just sat there thinking, if you only knew, I've got no idea. I've got no idea where I am in the chart. I've got no idea what should be happening. But I was literally just playing the groove. And, sometimes that's all that's needed, But I mean, it was definitely, those early days, I suppose, in answer to your question, there was loads of those moments where I could have just gone, I'm out of my depth here or whatever. But I suppose what counterbalanced that was my sort of obsession with reading about drummers and reading all these stories and reading biographies and autobiographies and interviews. And I mean, podcasts weren't even a thing then, but if they had been, that would have been a resource that I would have been totally into. Because one of the things is everybody has stories like that. Everybody has those moments of, that are going to make or break you. And there's been
plenty of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I want to get into the reading thing with you in a bit, but do you remember, from learning and then, you're growing and you get your first professional gig? Do you remember what it was? What that was like?
Yeah. The first time I ever played for money was for a production of The Vagabond Prince, which was like some old school musical, but I still couldn't really read by that point. And I must have been about 11 or 12. And I got paid £30 for the whole week.
Not much different now.
yeah, totally. That would be a good gig in COVID era. So that was like those sort of Amdram things would sort of pay a bit of money. And in my sort of mind as a 12, 13-year-old, I was like, okay, this is serious,
Yeah.
And then I came to the end of my high schooling and tried to audition to get into so basically Ken Mailer, who'd been my teacher and my sort of guide as far as drum goes up until that point, I had a lot of heart trouble. And as I was coming towards the end of my high schooling time, where you would start to think about music college or whatever, he was really ill, so he wasn't around. So I found myself auditioning for sort of the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama, the Guildhall in London, the Royal Academy. Didn't get a place at any of them because I couldn't really do the percussion stuff properly. I remember I'd never played, marimba or anything like that before. And the audition pieces came through and it was like this sort of grade 8 Vivaldi piece applied onto a xylophone. So basically I shedded it for 3 months, memorized about the first 4 pages or whatever, and then did that in the audition. And then I basically, this is for the Royal Scottish Academy of Music, I said, look, guys, I'm a drummer. I want to play drum kit. This probably isn't for me, but I've done what I can to rectify the situation, but this isn't really for me. And they said, so I did the Timps thing and got to the end of it. And I don't even know who was on the panel, but they just said, well, that was brave. And then they said, if he offered you a place here, would you come? And rightly or wrongly, I said I wouldn't, because this isn't what I want to do. I want to play drums. That's what I do, and I probably was a mistake applying for that. But anyway, so I came down to London, auditioned for like the jazz course at the Guildhall and wherever else I applied. I can't remember now. Anyway, I didn't get into any of them. And hearing all these players going into audition, I was like, man, these guys are so much better than me. They had a much wider skill set. They've been exposed to, probably a lot more of sort of a higher end sort of things. And anyway, so at the Guildhall, it was Trevor, I want to say Trevor Tompkins, who was auditioning there, and he basically took me aside. So I was 16 at that point, because in Scotland you leave school a little bit earlier than down south, and he said to me, "Look, you're very young. You're not really quite good enough, but you should go and have lessons with a guy up north called Dave Hassel." So he then gave me Dave's number, and I phoned Dave up and went for a lesson, terrifying lesson with Dave. And I sort of said, "Would you be prepared to give me lessons?" Because I was at this point where I'd left school, wasn't really sure what I was doing, but I knew this was what it was. So I got this job working in a takeaway in my hometown, Pizza X, and £3 an hour. And basically that was my life for about a year, was going and seeing Dave down in Manchester as much as I could, working in a pizza shop, practicing as much as I could. And then I started going to this like a Saturday jazz course up at Strathclyde Uni in Glasgow, which the Scottish saxophone player Tommy Smith had put together. And there was an amazing teacher there called Laurie Hamilton. And Laurie very kindly, getting back to your question, he very kindly booked me for like a function playing with him. And really that was kind of one of those moments, because that I did all right doing that gig, presumably, or he was just being very kind. But either way, I survived my night of playing Simply the Best or whatever it was. And then Laurie recommended me to this other band who were auditioning for a drummer, and that band was called Funhouse, and they were like a covers band, but they were working 4 nights a week, different places in Scotland. So basically I auditioned for them, and because Laurie, I think, had given me the nod, they booked me for the band. And yeah, I went from earning £3 an hour cooking pizza to earning 80 quid a night playing the drums, and I was like, wow, okay. So for me, that was like the first sort of moment of, okay, this dream is starting to become a reality. And that was probably largely due to the fact that I had the lessons with Dave, and Dave is an incredible teacher. I mean, I still practice the things that he taught me today. I would say my entire career is springboarded off the stuff that I learned from Dave, for sure. Life-changing drum lessons. But yeah, basically, that was kind of the early days. And then the year after that, I enrolled in like a music degree course up at Strathclyde Uni, because I thought that was the right thing to do. So I started studying music full time and playing with this band 3-4 nights a week, whenever. And then I realized, I was like, okay, this is 4 years, the course. And I was like, we were doing a lot of things that, in my naivety and in my single-mindedness at the time, I just thought, this isn't really for me. So we were writing a lot of essays on education and various other things. And I was like, but all I want to do is play the drums, and looking back at that, I should have just knuckled down and done those other things and learned the lessons that were applicable. But I was so singularly kind of focused on what I was doing. I was like, I'm not sure this is going to work out. I'm not good enough to move to London as a player. I knew that. I didn't have the experience, didn't have the skills. What do I do? And every musician that I spoke to had worked on cruise ships at some point, and I just thought, okay, well, I'm gonna try and audition for a cruise liner. So I got a copy of the Stage newspaper, as it was then, and drummer wanted ad. Came down to London on the train and did this audition. And the agent, he said, well, your reading's a bit iffy, but you play with a nice time and a nice sound, so we'll give you a go. And I was like, great, okay, so how's all this going to work? And then I get a phone call 2 weeks later going, okay, can you start in 2 weeks? You're flying out to Florida to get on the ship. So I was 19 at that point, and that was the next step up in sort of the ladder, and that was the most amazing sort of music college that I could have gone to, you know, because you're playing 2 or 3 shows every day, and you're reading, and you're doing so much reading that I think I kind of just worked through all of that, all of those reading issues that I had. I just gradually chipped away at them, because you were reading new charts every day with new acts that were coming on. And one day it was a juggler, the next day it was a comedian, then it was a singer, then it was like a production show with a cast and some dancers, you know. It was like the perfect training ground for all the theatre-y type stuff that I ended up doing, you know. So
would you
yeah.
recommend for young drummers who want to start their career to audition for cruise ships, for cruise gigs?
I don't think it would hurt. You know, I mean, I think the reality is for young players today is that there's not enough of those grassroots gigs. You know, because if you talk to guys that came through in the 70s, they'll talk about how there was a lot more working men's type clubs, there was a lot more big band type gigs, there was a lot more reading situations, what we would probably call old school session type work. You know, there was a lot more of that at a grassroots kind of level. And that isn't there anymore. And as far as I'm aware, sort of doing the cruises is the only place where you're going to be doing 3 gigs a day. And you know, you're it's not incredible money, but it's certainly for somebody with no financial commitments, which is probably what you're going to be at that age. It's a brilliant training ground. You know, I couldn't really have asked for anything better. I mean, one of the things about cruises is there's 2 types of musicians on a cruise ship. There's musicians that are either ascending in their career, or musicians that are descending in their career. So it's a great opportunity to play with perhaps some older players who have maybe gone, you know what, we're kind of finished with our proper career, but we're going to do a couple of years on cruises and just have a nice time on a boat. So you're getting a chance to play with some quite experienced players in that way. And also, you know, playing with younger guys. So you're getting a lot of input in different ways. And also for me, it was, I was working for an American cruise line. So I was playing with guys who had graduated from Berkeley and, you know, the new school and that kind of thing. So that's a really good way of kind of going, okay, well, where do I fit in this? You know, what are the skills that I need to develop, and, you know, all that kind of thing. You know, I mean, I've never been the most gifted, and I've never been the most able, but I've always persevered, you know, and that's kind of what's given me the career, you know. So if there's anybody watching this who's going, you know, maybe the reading thing doesn't come easy, I would just say stick at it, put yourself in situations that are difficult, because that's how you learn, you know. Absolutely.
And on the ship then, with the reading thing, did you have time like to kind of ask questions or go through stuff, or was it kind of like, I'm just at the deep end, but at the same time, you know, they're not going to get rid of you because this is what you're kind of hired for that time. Do you know what I mean? Did it allow you to have more mistakes?
You are in the middle of the sea. They cannot get rid of you.
Exactly.
I was very much still working on my playing, you know. So I actually went through a phase where I was getting frustrated that I couldn't get on the kit to practice. So I started missing a night's sleep. And sneaking up into the sort of concert hall on the ship, sitting there with my hot rods in the early hours, working my way through the new breed or whatever it was, and then sleeping a bit during the day. And I had a practice pad kit that I'd bought somewhere in one of the music shops in Florida, and I had that in a storeroom. And I was just doing what I could, but equally I was also messing around quite a lot. I was probably drinking far more than I should have been, you know, and doing all that stuff as well. So, but I was very much like, in my head, I was like, okay, you know, I'm still working on a plane. I'm still trying to go somewhere. I'm not, I was very aware I wasn't the finished article. And I was probably around musicians who were good enough to know, like in my head, I was probably thinking, I'm nailing the gig, but probably looking back, probably I wasn't nailing the gig 100%, but I was nailing it enough to keep the job. You know, and we all make mistakes all the time, but I remember it was an amazing learning curve, just simple things that have helped me later on, like just learning how to concentrate for that amount of time, learn how to play consistently day after day after day, and reduce the amount of mistakes you make, so that you can sit on a touring show or a West End show and do the same thing every day, within fairly fixed perimeters, and still be able to concentrate and nail that gig every day and deliver each gig like it's the first time and you care about it, So there were a lot of really good life lessons that I learned on those ships, for sure. Even just stuff like, I remember, some of the more experienced guys were like, reading newspapers and stuff in between, in their bars rests or whatever, if we couldn't be seen. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm going to start doing that. So basically I committed like the cardinal sin. I took my headphones off, put them on the floor, Tom, then picked up whatever I was reading, only to hear click, click, click coming from my headphones, which weren't on my head, and try to grab them and hold them on my head and play with one hand, and making an absolute mess of it, So I think, had that been a West End show, I would have been out the door probably, but thankfully I was able to make those kind of mistakes. And you only do that once, I was able to make some mistakes like that in a situation where probably the pressure wasn't quite so much as it would be on, more pro things later on. I would recommend cruises for people. I don't think I would recommend doing sort of the cover band type gig, because they quite often have like different venues, so different bars. So there might be a band playing, sort of pop covers in one, really quietly in the corner with hot rods. I think that would probably be a bit soul destroying after a while. But it all depends on attitude, doesn't it? There was an amazing drummer on my first ship. There was a guy called Mick Humble, and Mick he was an English drummer who'd moved out to Florida, and he'd played with like Jaco Pastorius and loads of people. It was an amazing thing, actually, just listening to him, hearing his stories, being able to watch him play with the jazz trio each evening. It was so much. There's always so much opportunity if you look for it and you're open to it. I think that's the thing.
Excellent.
Fast forward, and you've toured with countless theatre shows. You've played the West End however many times. You've basically played every. Your CV is amazing. Awesome.
That's very kind. All I ever wanted to do was be a working drummer. And what I would say on that is there's a lot of guys who do that type of work, but much higher up the food chain of music than me. I would just say I'm a working musician, and I've been very fortunate that I've stumbled into things sometimes, a good opportunity to play with somebody, or somebody's unavailable, so I've ended up doing it instead, that sort of thing, but all of that stuff is totally built on that sort of history of doing cruises and doing shows at a lower level, and developing the ability to switch stylistically from one thing to another, and be able to work with a conductor, and be able to read, and be able to work with clicks, and
be able
triggers.
To know what not to play.
For sure. I think just being wise enough to know what the language is of the music that you're playing. I remember I went for a lesson when I came down for those auditions for the music colleges that I got, I didn't get into, but I went for a lesson with a drummer called Paul Elliott, who I was teaching at Drum Tech, and actually became a really good friend, sort of 10 years further on. And I sort of did their evaluation process, and I think I got like 6 out of 10, on their whatever it was. But one of the things that Paul said interested him about the way that I played was that he said, you know, you play these styles and you play the beats, but you also play fills that are appropriate to this style. And he says, he was like, you know, a lot of guys when they're 16, 17, what happens is they might know a groove, you know, they might be beat collectors in the sense of I can play a soca groove or I can play a rumba or whatever, but then they'll play some ridiculous fill that is got nothing to do with the type of music. Where I was always encouraged by all of the people that taught me to kind of have a wider view of the music. You know, how loud are the different elements of the kit in relation to each other? What are the stylistic appropriate fills, if at all? You know, and I remember sitting in many years later, sitting in with Ralph Salmins, who was playing a show, and yeah, I was just when I was sort of coming through, and one of the things that Ralph said really stuck with me was, don't, you know, when you're playing a style, is everything's got a groove and everything's got to be right. You know, it's got to be the right sound. It's got to be the right. It's got to be the right beats, and it's got to be the right fills. And it's got to be at the right volume for the situation. You know, all of that stuff. Being able to be a chameleon. You know, as always, being a team player, playing for the music, not just this is my thing. This is how I play. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've made lots of mistakes in that regard as well. But that's how you learn. You know, I remember turning up to audition for something, and I remember thinking, well, if I'm going to be on the road playing this thing I want to be able to play like me. So, you know, I remember sitting in the audition and ripping around the drums, playing some stupid drum fill, and you know. And I could just tell I hadn't got the gig by the tumbleweed that fell afterwards. You know,
I just realized I didn't get the gig by the mill of my drum fill.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. Yeah, don't worry about playing again. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. We don't need to hear the third song. That's fine. Yeah.
Alrighty, Kira, that moment you love.
Oh, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. It's like this whizzed by today.
Which is a good thing.
This is a great thing. I don't even think I asked you like anything on my list. Oh.
Email him later.
Yeah, I'll email him later. Oh, last question. Okay, what do you think if you had one piece of advice to impart on a drum student, just one thing, what would it be?
That's a really good question. I would say believe in yourself and stick to it. You know, it's a long-term thing. Learning an instrument is a lifetime's work, and if you want to do this for a career, it is hard, and it's particularly hard, I would say, for about the first 20 years. You know, where you're learning to play, but then you've got to actually go out there and make connections and develop a career, and that doesn't happen overnight. You know, that's something that is a long-term investment. You know, so yeah, believe in yourself and stick to it. You know, I mean, like I still feel I am not the finished article by any stretch of the imagination. I've still got lots to do. I still feel very much like, you know, a newbie at drums, you know, for sure. And along the way, you know, things we haven't talked about, but you know, I've broken arms, I've broken legs, I've done all sorts of stuff, which has got in the way quite a lot of this. But just sticking to it, you know, for the long term, through the good times and through the bad times, you know. So just believe in yourself and believe in what you're doing. And I think it's a really confusing time, you know, with social media. And, you know, you put your phone on and you're hit with 1,000 drummers who can all play all sorts of incredible things, you know, and, you know, that can be so overwhelming, even for an experienced player, that can be like overwhelming, speaking for myself, you know. So I don't even know how I would begin to process any of that if I was young coming through now, you know, because I think probably a lot of that stuff is overexposed, and it's not always helpful, So yeah, I would just say believe in yourself and stick to it, and know it's going to be hard, and that's true even for guys who come out of college. I've taught a couple of guys that they've come out of college and they've got an amazing gig straight away, and it's kind of like, okay, well, that's amazing and thoroughly deserved, but it's still going to spin round at some point. It's just you've had that amazing gig at the beginning. You're still going to have to climb up that foundation because there's no foundation in place yet, So I think it's just being realistic and believe in what you're doing, for sure.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, being so
thanks,
open
Stu.
with us.
It's an absolute pleasure, and thanks for inviting me to come and talk to you. It's been really cool. So yeah, good luck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Take care.
you.